Thank you, everybody, to be there. This is the webinar organized by CIAMS, the International Coalition for the Abolition of Surrogate Motherhood. Today, we're going to talk about surrogacy as a patriarchal appropriation of motherhood, and Patricia Moreno-Murga, which is a feminist, researcher, and writer specializing in the political dimension of motherhood, will talk to you today. In 2017, she published the book Maternity, Equality, and Fraternity, Mothers as Political Subjects in Post-Labor Societies, sparking a feminist debate on motherhood in Spain. She later founded Spain's first feminist mothers organization in 2018. Currently, she's a member of CIAMS and works in a PhD research in anthropology and at the Universitat Autònoma de Barcelona, focusing on the patriarchal representation and appropriation of motherhood. Please, you can use the chat, of course, but for the question, please use the Q&A, which is the little logo, the little sign post down on your screen. And don't hesitate to ask questions to Patricia. Patricia, the floor is yours right now.
Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you, CIAMS. Thank you, Marie-Joseph, for your introduction. And thank you to everybody who is listening. I am very glad to be here today for this presentation and, well, be able to share with you my work. Well, I would like to start by explaining how my interest in feminism and motherhood as related issues was set off. I couldn't find in feminism a convincing answer for a question that worried me. If we're all born of a woman, if motherhood produces a society, how come that when we talk seriously about how to organize a society, that is about politics, motherhood is a completely ignored fact? The question led me to the study of modern citizenship, what we consider or not a contribution to society, how the access to all rights and resources is mediated by the labor market, and the way in which these structures set the marginalization of reproduction and care. I wrote Maternity, Equality, and Fraternity, published in 2017, that Marie-Joseph has mentioned. And I concluded that the only way to break the hierarchy between the productive and the reproductive spheres would be the acknowledgement of mothers as political subjects. But in fact, my interest in feminism and motherhood was really set off mainly by my own motherhood. I think it's important to say this, to make the condition of mother explicit, to come out of the, so to say, motherphobia closet, and show some pride, or at least not shame, for being a mother in the feminist arena. I think that it is urgently needed in feminism to make the condition of mother important and worthy, as something that could be powerful, that it is always transcendent, and above all, that belongs to us, that is ontologically ours, because only us women can procreate. The fact that we do have in our hands, at least in biological and theoretical sense, the continuity of the species, the reproduction of society, is a powerful idea. Of course, we have the way of millennia of patriarchal structures in our minds, and these structures tell us that motherhood is meaningless, unworthy, and that it doesn't belong to us. Obviously, in our phallogocentric societies, Motherhood is an experience mediated by material and symbolic structures that turn it into a real difficulty our efforts to achieve autonomy and status. But this is not what motherhood is. This is what patriarchy has made of it. Well, now let's talk about surrogacy. Surrogacy is, in my view, the culmination of a long historical process in which patriarchy has deprived motherhood of any value, meaning, dignity, unless it is done as a service, as a gift to men. Today, we're going to be exploring this process briefly. Surrogacy is also the practice that better defines the new phallogocentric order that is today being implemented. The old one, the old patriarchal order, relied on the general acceptance of the hierarchy of the sexes. But now, at least in the Western world, the subordination of women is not accepted anymore as a political principle to organize society. During most of the 20th century, patriarchal structures were weakened. But in the last decades, they have been restructuring in a very efficient manner. So that even though now, on paper, we are all equal, the ferocity of the markets, the stark inequalities, globalization, and technology, all these make the perfect breeding ground for a new masculinist supremacy. Today, there is a patriarchal backlash harassing feminism on two fronts. One that tries to revert women's rights and return to obsolete traditional gender roles, and the other that is a new patriarchal order that plans to normalize surrogacy. This new masculinist supremacy vindicates reproductive justice, reproductive rights, and makes statements in support of women's autonomy, equal rights for all families, freedom of choice. It spreads globally, disguised as feminism and activism in defense of human rights. But what it really aims for is the old patriarchal right of male access to the use, abuse, and commodification of women's bodies. I see four causes in the present rise and normalization of surrogacy. One is business. The second is the desire for babies in a society where reproduction has become difficult. The third is technology. And the fourth is what I consider the backbone of this business, its root cause. And it is the millenary subjugation of women in patriarchy. This is the cause on which I would like to focus today. Now, before I go on, I would like to make a conceptual remark which is important for me. When I use the words mother, motherhood, maternity, and so on, I'm always talking by default of biological motherhood, about the process of pregnancy and giving birth. And if I ever talk of other forms of motherhood, for instance, by adoption or genetic, I will make it explicit. Okay, so I would like to start with an important question. Male supremacy is today universal, but has it always been like that? Is male domination a natural biological structure, or is it a cultural construct? As feminists, I think we should not accept the idea that male domination is natural or biological. Yet, the fact is that most egalitarian feminists think and make politics as if phallogocentrism and male supremacy were inevitable. We do not know what the gender system was among our remote ancestors. Our species, sapiens sapiens, has been on the planet for 200,000 years. And we have written records only for the last 5,000. The archaeological records give us information about bodily functions and economic life, but it is almost impossible to have data about what the relationships between men and women were like. Well, now I'm going to share my first slide. Here we see these Venuses or goddesses. These statuettes are documents, very interesting documents, because they are the oldest representations of human bodies in culture. They are dated, as you see there, as old as 42,000 years old, and have been found in sites in Asia, Europe, and Africa, and there are equivalents in America. Now, being these findings so important, it is very striking that anthropologists, historians, philosophers, and social scientists have paid so little theoretical attention to them. Few hypotheses have been made, and the few existing, like that of Maria Gimbutas, are not in the usual academic curricula. This silence, like so many others, is part of the phallogocentric symbolic order, an ideology which systematically hides, denies, and devalues maternal potency. We don't know exactly what these Venuses symbolized, but there is no doubt of one thing. For the human groups of that time, maternal potency was something important, and it was socially acknowledged. There is another issue concerning the origins of culture that makes anthropologists uncomfortable. The fact that the ethnographies of some primitive societies tell us that biological fatherhood was unknown to them. Again, the anthropological orthodoxy quickly explained this ethnographic data as religious mystification. This debate is now closed. It's not closed. And biological fatherhood may have been unknown during most of prehistory. So let's talk now about fatherhood. Androcentric culture has always silenced motherhood. So to know more about it, we need to resort to the study of fatherhood. The ethnographic record states clearly that fatherhood has always been mainly a social institution. Throughout human history, biology has been defined by motherhood, but not fatherhood. Fatherhood is cross-culturally diverse, but most ethnographies describe it as a social form defined by legality, duty, and power. What typically describes patriarchal fatherhood is that the children that the mother gives birth to belong to the father and his patriline, not to the mother. So, the appropriation of children is the emblem of the patriarchal fatherhood. We can see this intensely political and conventional character of patriarchal fatherhood in many ethnographic and historical examples. Well, the Nuer, which you can see in the middle, those are the Nuer, were a patrilocal cattle herding society in South Sudan, Africa. Among them, marriage was legalized by the payment of a number of cattle heads as bride wealth. This bride wealth guaranteed the rights of the patriline to the children of that woman. If the marriage didn't work, the woman could divorce only if the bride wealth was returned. And after a few years, that was almost impossible. So if she didn't divorce, she could still leave the husband and live with another man. But all the children that she may bear ever after would belong to the husband's patriline. So the patriline had permanent rights over all the children issued from her womb. Other paradigmatic example of patriarchal fatherhood is the Roman paterfamilias. His authority over his wife, his slaves, and all the children born to them was absolute. When a child was born in his domus, he decided whether he or she would live or be exposed. In the Republic, he could even kill or sell his children. Patriarchy means rule of the father. It means that there is a hierarchy between mother and father, and that the potency of the father is always prevalent over that of the mother. The fundamental end of patriarchal structures is the appropriation of women's capacity to procreate. And to sustain and institutionalize paternal power, there are two main basic social principles which we can find in every patriarchal society. The children belong to the father, and only fathers can grant children the legitimacy to exist. In our Western societies, the absolute paternal power over the children in marriage has been intact until the late 19th century. In fact, it is not until well into the 20th century that women had, for the first time, full legal rights as mothers over their children. Second one, only fathers grant children the legitimacy to exist. We have to bear in mind that not so long ago in the Western world, and it still happens today in many places, whoever is born only of a mother and not of a father is a bastard, an outcast, a second-class citizen. Throughout history, it was paternal filiation what gave children access to a dignified social existence. So fatherhood has always been, above all, a political and legal matter. The changes brought about by feminism made the humiliating social figure of the bastard disappear. Now, motherhood without the approval, protection, and legitimation of a male is possible. This is, of course, a great social advance, but it is also a great blow at traditional patriarchal structures because it undermines the position that men had in reproductive relations with women in marriage. Therefore, it is no coincidence that surrogacy has become a global phenomenon just in the moment when women can, for the first time in history, become mothers outside the sexual contract. Surrogacy is one of the answers to this new scenario. And it is a way in which the patriarchal system tries to regain hold over reproduction. I think that if we want to understand male appropriation, we have to pay attention to the psychic drives behind it. And to do that, we should point at two facts. One, that men are excluded from the most complex and creative process that a human body can have. And two, that men are absolutely dependent on women for the continuity of any human group. There is no society or family group possible without the pregnancy of a woman. These inescapable facts lie at the core of patriarchy. This psychic drama explains why almost in every mythical, religious, symbolic, political, and today also scientific and legal narrative of human reproduction, the phallus, the male seed or gamete, that is the male potency in any of its forms, has such centrality. And it also explains why sexual intercourse, which is the only moment in which men are involved in procreation, is considered symbolically and politically the crucial moment of reproduction. An example of this centrality is the Baruya culture. You have them on the left. The Baruya culture is a strongly phallogocentric society that lives in the heights of New Guinea. They explain their harsh misogynistic ideology through a hierarchy of male and female fluids. Semen is the origin of life. It produces babies, male strength, the growth of breasts in girls, and mother's milk. And it also conveys the sacred, creative, male energy of the sun. On the other hand, there is the menstrual blood, which is extremely dangerous for men. It is a constant threat to their strength and health, and it can even kill them. In every patriarchal society, the structures of male appropriation must be sustained, consolidated, transformed, created, and legitimated. And for that end, a continuous symbolic work must be done so that two goals may be simultaneously achieved. One, motherhood and maternal potency must be denied and devalued. And two, fatherhood and male potency must be boosted and institutionalized. This is a highly complex and manipulative symbolic move. So, in a rational and scientific spirit, we could ask ourselves, how do you legitimize such a counterintuitive narrative? Well, the answer is by mystifications, what Mary Daly called the processions. On the right, you have this picture of Zeus, a god that is the incarnation of patriarchy, and he's giving birth to Athena. She's springing out of his head, as you see. And Zeus also gave birth to Dionysus from his side. These myths simulating and mimicking the maternal potency are persistent in all patriarchal myths. And they are symbolic appropriations of the mother's potency. I'm going to give an example of one of the most frequent and universal symbolic devices to degrade mother's potency and enhance the father's. These are the ethnotheories of procreation, and they're mythical accounts of how the creation of human beings happens, how procreation happens. These theories, ethnotheories, have been found in tribal societies all over the world, in Africa, Asia, America, and Europe. The basic outline, they vary a lot, but the basic outline of the story is always the same, and it goes: even though women provide raw material and cook the babies in their wombs, it is men who have the true creative potency. They have mystical powers that give babies their human form, spirit, and identity. Well, the Baruya we've just seen have this type of account, but it was also the standard among Greeks. Here we have some verses in the slide of the Greek tragedy, the Eumenides of the 5th century BC, and in it, Apollo explains how generation happens. Well, I'm not going to read because it's like difficult to read, but in the verses, he explains that the mother is not the real parent of the child she carries. The real parent is the male who plants the seed in her. The mother just babysits and nurtures the child. So women are containers. Clearly, Apollo had already surrogacy in mind because it's an exact description of surrogacy. Today, a lot of babies born by surrogacy, when they come to this world, they just have paternal filiation. They are children born to the father. So like Zeus, the modern contracting fathers in surrogacy are the sole creators of their offspring. All these myths and representations are symbolic workings designed to legitimize the male appropriation of women's motherhoods. But these appropriations actually happen in the material world, a world that is run by law and politics. Actually, another way to describe patriarchy can be as the refusal to grant motherhood a political and institutional status. The continuity of male supremacy depends crucially on keeping politics and reproduction, biological reproduction, completely alien, as conflicting and incompatible spheres. This is basic. Now, law is a patriarchal tool. Today, as always, paternal power is asserted through law. Today in the courts, fathers can easily succeed in seizing custodies from mothers, even if that is clearly against the interest of the child. Tools such as the parental alienation syndrome, which no health authority has ever approved, are used in litigations for custody. Judges grant custodies and visitation rights to men who have pending claims or have been sentenced for violence. And the lack of credibility of mothers in trials is a scandal that, in the case of Spain at least, even the European Council and the United Nations have condemned. Today, a spermatozoid, which is half a cell, grants a man complete legal power to appropriate a child gestated and brought to this world by a woman whom the owner of the spermatozoon may never even get to know personally. In surrogacy, a spermatozoon can legally deny motherhood and generate fatherhood in the very same legal act. The legal power of the spermatozoon is today magnificent. All this is the product of millennia of the valuation and appropriation of motherhood. When 5,000 years ago, writing was developed, law became a key instrument in the articulation of a more sophisticated and effective way of appropriation. You can see here the Code of Hammurabi on a stone. You can see its phallic shape, very telling. And there is the code engraved on stone. The Code of Hammurabi is a legal code of the 18th century BC, a time when the Babylonian empires were already perfectly consolidated patriarchal systems. Many of the regulations in it are family law. You can see one entry here, it's 170. You can see there how the father, the paternal word, "you are my sons," is the source of law. Just the father pronouncing those words creates law. And this is the same that we saw before when the word of the pater familias, one word from him, determined whether the newborn was to be kept or to be exposed. In all these cases, biological motherhood is just a natural substrata to be legislated upon. So, by the arrival of the modern age, the degradation of motherhood was so deeply ingrained in the minds of men and women that this helps to explain degrees of subjugation which are difficult to explain otherwise. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the father of the political principles of liberty, equality, and fraternity, had no second thoughts when he forced Thérèse Levasseur, his concubine and maid, and mother of his 5 children, to take year after year, one by one, each of those 5 children to an orphanage as soon as they were born, against the will of their mother, who obeyed, crying, as Rousseau tells in his Confessions. Motherhood, once more, is worthless unless it is appropriated by a man. In the world of contract, law, and reason, raw biological existence means nothing. And here, I'd like to bring in Judith Butler, because she is right when she says that motherhood, what in her elusive style she calls the maternal prediscursive or the authentic feminine precultural, is relevant. She is right about the insignificance of motherhood in a phallogocentric order. And in fact, her view is not so different from that of Apollo. Unlike Apollo, she clearly speaks on behalf of the father. If you're interested in this, I have a text that is going to be published very soon. This contrast between the power of the law as the expression of the father's interests and the insignificance of motherhood is fully enforced in surrogacy. Well, I think maybe at this point, we should be wondering, should we feminists trust the law as the better tool to conquer political status? I think this is an important question. Every legal system today is the product of 5,000 years of history of patriarchal law. Obviously, we must use the democratic principles of law to our advantage. But I think it is important not to forget the origins and the history of law, and the fact that even in formally egalitarian democracies, there is a tendency, a constant inertia of the system to subjugate women and to reproduce a phallogocentric order in which the subject of law is a non-existent, sexually neutral individual who is completely alien to the process of human reproduction, that is, a male. So to introduce some mistrust in a feminist conceptualization of the law would be one of the objectives of this presentation. Surrogacy is a perfect example of that inertia of the jural system to reproduce the phallogocentric order. So the title of this slide is in fact, it's a tweet. It's a tweet which was with the photo. If you see that photograph with a group of men, loads of men, they're all baby buyers and they all have there on the sofa their babies. So it was a tweet, they tweeted, Spanish men, and they said, this is surrogacy, and if you don't like it, fuck you. This is what it said. Okay, so this is surrogacy. Surrogacy is baby trafficking. So to dodge the inconvenience that in our Western society, it is illegal to trade in human beings, this buying, selling, and giving away babies is disguised as contract. A contract for renting a womb in commercial surrogacy, and a contract for the compulsory promise of a gift in altruistic surrogacy. Contracts in modernity are supposed to be the guarantee of a free agreement between equals, and the consent of all parties is assumed. But, as Carol Pateman explained to us so brilliantly, when the contract articulates the relationships between the sexes, as in contracts of marriage, prostitution, and surrogacy, what is really being articulated there are relations of domination and subordination. The idea that baby trafficking is inevitable and that surrogacy is the best option for many women is a pragmatic vision that unfortunately is very common. And it is the current expression of the old patriarchal vision that considers the subordination of women natural, and their inclination to put their bodies at the service of others innate. In surrogacy regulations, rights by pregnancy and birth are cancelled, and rights derived from genetics are emphasized. This is a truly bizarre, irrational, and risky legal standard, considering the insignificant function of the gametes, in contrast with biological motherhood. Also because genetics is a form of biological relation that is abstract, as it doesn't necessarily imply any physical contact or emotional bond between the child and the owner of the gamete. But most of those debating, publishing studies, and modeling public opinion on surrogacy are experts in law, and their criteria stick to the logics of the jural. And the jural is a way to understand reality in which motherhood, babies, primal bonds, and care have never been considered priorities, and not even issues under its scope. So it is to be expected that irrational and risky standards will be used to regulate reproduction. As we said before, motherhood as a female experience has always been considered radically outside the range of what is political, socially relevant, or legally valuable. Surrogacy, as all patriarchal contracts, depends on the actual existence of legal channels to legitimize appropriation. But these channels must also dodge some difficulties. 3 are the main challenges. These legal channels must, 1, subvert what has been up till now the most basic and universal principle of natural law, that is, that the mother is the woman who gives birth to the child. 2, in procedures which are generally international, they must find the gaps, bend, and bypass the different national legislations of each country. And 3, they need to impose and persuade of the fairness of a new counterintuitive idea, that the best interest of the child is to separate him or her from her mother. But the newborn ignores the commercial, medical, and legal transactions that have determined her existence. And what she really needs badly is to bond with her mother. Right now, 2 legal instruments that explore how to dodge these difficulties are being worked on. One at the Hague Conference on Private International Law, and the other is the European Certificate of Filiation. Both of them aim to ease the global circulation of children. And the European project says it plans to regulate filiation, and I quote, regardless of the circumstances of conception and birth of the child and the type of family. In both of these projects and in all pro-regulation narratives, the central idea is that the origin of the child, which is always the mother's womb, is irrelevant and must be ignored. Well, I'm now getting to the end. Centuries of denial of the maternal potency have brought us to a world in which we are formally equal, but in which our most basic potency as sex is seen as worthless, not only by the patriarchal system, but often also by ourselves. The surrogacy industry has been able to thrive in this ideological climate, in which motherhood appears to be today obsolete. The consent of surrogate mothers wouldn't be possible without the deeply internalized mental structures that make women think that subordination is inevitable and motherhood must be a gift to men. When we hear surrogate mothers saying they are so happy to make the gift of life to others, what they are expressing is what culture has taught them about the value of motherhood. A woman who is a mother in a heteronormative relation gets little praise, but some. A woman who is a single mother by choice gets criticism and poverty. But surrogate mothers in modern societies are today heroines of the new phallogocentric order. They get attention, acknowledgement, fake love, travels, relationships. It is not just money what surrogates get. If they comply, they are rewarded with an amount of praise, flattery, and celebration that most of them would never, ever get in their normal lives as workers and mothers. And the surrogate committed to the business may even change her life and achieve the status of a cool, hype, empowered woman, status impossible to attain for her otherwise. It is precisely social acknowledgement and empowerment what is denied to motherhood in patriarchy in a very structural way, as we have seen. And I mean motherhood as a woman's experience. Well, today, this denial has taken an even more radical turn. Now, mothers disappear from the official and legal language in many national and international organizations and become pregnant persons, gestational carriers, breastfeeding persons, etc. And pregnancy becomes a reproductive technique or outsourcing pregnancy. In this dehumanizing new paradigm, motherhood has less social entity than ever before. Now, motherhood can be technologically fragmented. The old mystifications that depicted mother as containers or ovens where babies were cooked become legal realities. Human motherhood becomes a natural resource to be exploited. So, for instance, in California, the primal bond of puppies and their mothers is protected by law, but the one of human babies is not. The old phallogocentric fantasy of men having babies without the need of women not only becomes legally possible, now gay couples and single dads spread the narrative in the media that their children do not have mothers, that in their case, a mother does not exist, and they don't need one. The erasure of the mother is complete. This new non-binary political agenda that denies sexual difference and pretends to be feminism has gained ground in international organizations such as the United Nations. Pro-surrogacy lobbies are pushing for the introduction of a new definition of infertility in the World Health Organization. Supposedly serious articles describe infertility as a disease, and I quote, associated with a psychological deficiency or a condition that requires medical solution. Well, I would like to finish now with a thought for the children born by surrogacy. I really think that we haven't seen yet the consequences of this cruel practice on children. I agree with her brave sister, Olivia Morel, that the end of this form of slavery will come with some kind of Me Too of children born by surrogacy. But this will take some time. To realize and speak about such a trauma is something that cannot generally be done before one is 30 or 40. And it needs such an amazing amount of courage that not everybody can do it. If we think of the prehistoric Venuses we saw at the beginning, and the way they portray women's procreative potency, we can see that we have come a long way in the political, symbolic, and moral devaluation of motherhood. I'm persuaded that the feminism of the 21st century will have to put motherhood at the center of its agenda. We cannot defend a universal sex category of women if we don't understand the key and crucial position that motherhood has in patriarchal domination. Surrogacy is the new face of patriarchy. We need a universal ban of it, and that's what we're doing, what we're working for in CIAMS. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Thank you. There is yes, of course, we've got to fight for the universal abolition of surrogate motherhood. Yes, this is our fight, really. And there is a few questions. There is one which is, can you please somebody is asking you to repeat a quote about contracts between men and women. If you can remind of this quote, can you repeat
contracts?
it?
Well, I have said a few things about contracts. I don't know exactly what is it. Contracts. I was talking about Carol Bateman, of course, a sexual contract, and which if you repeat more specifically, maybe
Well, we will ask the author, Nivin, to precise to maybe to rewrite a question, please.
Yeah, because I mean, it's quite long what I say about contracts, you know, it's.
And also somebody, Anna, was, oh, yes, she says something, which is the question, the quote was about the sexual contract between men and women.
It's not a quote, it's mine. I mean, it's about, let me see. But it was maybe talking about Carol Bateman. Of course, in the sexual contract, what is being articulated are the relations of domination and subordination of men and women. I really don't know what she means.
Okay, we will anyway.
Yeah, if she says more
publish
specifically,
the video of the webinar, and she might find it again. Listening again to the webinar, and we will try to find it out. Well, the second question is about, the question, can you develop your argument about how Judith Butler has a similar discourse to the one of Apollo?
Well, that is complicated right now, because with Judith Butler, it's like, you know, well, her texts are complicated. I have said while I was explaining this, that in fact, I have a long article about this, which is very soon going to come out, published in a book in which some feminist with connected to the feminism of the difference. And it's Maria Binetti, who is with us too, who is the editor. And I think it's very soon going to be published. So we'll let you know. Okay, so Judith Butler, of course, Judith Butler, her for her, phallogocentrism is something you cannot overcome. I mean, it's something, it's culture, you know. For her, everything is culture. Everything is a construct, and in fact, the reason why she denies motherhood, because she denies motherhood, but she denies nature, she denies biology, she denies anything which has to be with nature, including the binary sexes. She denies, because in her scheme, absolutely everything is culture, and of course, culture is always phallogocentric. It always has to do with power, you know, and power is by definition phallogocentric. So in a way, she's an idealist, but she is in some way, even though her ideas are presented as very transgressive, I think in fact she's in a way conservative, because she cannot imagine that power can be transformed. I'm not saying, I mean, I'm not so naive. I'm not saying that there could be a society without some kind of power, but maybe the shape of the power, the conception of the power could be transformed. But Judith Butler cannot imagine that. She for her, these relations of domination, subjugation, which are gendered, and the feminine position is always the subjugation, and the masculine position is always domination. This cannot be changed. The basics of gender, of the hierarchy of the gender, cannot be changed. That's why her proposal is to play with it, to enjoy it, you know, and that's basically her idea. So of course, in a way, not in a way, clearly she's accepting the hierarchy as it is, the gender hierarchy, the structures, the phallogocentric structures. But of course, we can all, men and women, be masculine or be feminine, and we can play with it and we can enjoy with it. But the thing, that's why I wrote this article about Butler, because with Butler, okay, it can work, you know, her proposals could work if you are into sexual experiences, you know, if you think of sex as something, as a game, you know. But when you bring in reproduction, it doesn't work. When you bring in reproduction, it's like, you know, there is no way to present her theory as something which could be emancipatory for women. No way. So that's why my analysis, I'm not a philosopher, of course, I cannot, you know, I cannot criticize Butler from a philosophical point of view, but in my articles it's always, it's simple in a way. It's just finding the reasonings, the arguments where you just think of it, introducing the fact that reproduction exists and it doesn't work. There is something which a friend, I didn't see, I tried to find it and I couldn't find it, but a feminist friend told me that in some interview, Judith Butler was asked what she thinks about surrogacy. And it seems she said, I haven't thought about it.
Yeah, we're very eager to read your article on that part. And we hope that you can share the link to it.
It's going to be a book, a physical book. Well,
okay.
I suppose that, in fact, Maria Binetti knows this.
Okay, and it will be in Spanish, I suppose.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It's
okay.
There are a lot of Latin American authors too.
Yeah, yeah. I like, well, there is a few more questions, but just a remark. I like very much the fact that you emphasized the fact that pregnancy is biological, because, you know, there is always this confusion on surrogacy. People are saying that the commissioning people, the clients, they are the biological parents. They're just genetically related to the baby, but they are not the biological parents. It's the surrogate mothers who is the biological parents, because she had the burden of the pregnancy. She's the only one. Well then, another question. Yes, from Greece, our friend from Greece said that this is all frightening, and including the new technology. We need something optimistic to continue this fight. Yes, very true, Fotini. Yes, yes. But we are there. We are right, and we are still fighting, which is the good news. And we won't stop fighting, really.
No, we have a very long way, but we're on the right direction. Yeah. And about genetics, what you said, it's really amazing. It's really amazing how the gametes have become like the main thing, the most important thing, the definition of what that child is, which is crazy. The only reason why genetics is what defines the biology of the child is because it's what the only thing that men put into the procreation. And well, the other day it was funny. I was looking at how many spermatozoids are there in one ejaculation. Do you know how many spermatozoids?
A lot.
Between 20 and 600 million in one ejaculation. So just think of the value of this one thing. It's like, I mean, genetics, of course, it's not the same with women. We know that the ovum is much more costly, and of course, it's not the same to get an ovum from a woman than to get a spermatozoon from a man. But this is a symbolic. In fact, this is a symbolic strategy to use the word biology for genetics. We shouldn't do that. I think we should keep, biology is gestation and birth.
Yeah, on that topic, on one of your articles on your website, you says that only a tiny percentage of male ejaculation result in conception, but all female pregnancies can give birth to a human being. Yes. One more question. What do you think about women themselves taking advantage of surrogacy? There was some discourse recently about a famous actress who bought a daughter from a surrogate mother.
Mm-hmm. Well, I knew this was going to be a question, and in fact, I had a little bit, but I didn't have. Yeah, of course, women take advantage. They benefit as well from surrogacy, but surrogacy is always patriarchal. I mean, it has, it's, even if it's done by women, it's done with patriarchal arguments, with patriarchal instruments. And one thing which is quite clear for me is that surrogacy wouldn't be now the incredible, amazing business that it is, and wouldn't have gone, the regulation of surrogacy and the globalization wouldn't be a fact today if it wasn't because it's a male interest. If it was just to please infertile women, it wouldn't be as it is. The reason why it is such a powerful thing is because it's a male interest. The other thing is that there are some ethnographic studies in anthropology about surrogacy, and it is quite clear in those studies that most of the women in heterosexual couples that resort to surrogacy, they do it to comply with a patriarchal mandate of the nuclear family, having children. And a lot of these women, they reckon that it is to please the husband, So, and then, okay, there might be others that it's not like that, but still it is always a patriarchal logics, because the logic of surrogacy is that biological motherhood is worthless, absolutely. So that is, yeah, that is such a patriarchal concept, not such a patriarchal argument.
I think last question, because we are running late. Can you make your point, which is a long question, topic. Can you make your point from the LGBT rights perspective?
Well, for me, generally, when we talk about motherhood, really, the sexual orientation is quite irrelevant. I mean, women are mothers. It's not very, it's not very it doesn't change much if that woman is a lesbian or not. The thing is if she's a mother or not, if she's being exploited or not. What is quite clear now, I think, for everybody now, especially in CIAMS, we see the things that we see, that a big percentage of the gay male population is the way they exploit women, the way they are using this business of surrogacy is quite scary. The way they talk about women, the way they dehumanize women, because we're seeing that, we're reading their comments. So these gay pro-surrogacy lobbies are really scary, and they're I think they're extremely misogynistic and extremely patriarchal. You know, this is for the gay. Now, lesbians, most of them would be feminists and would be against, but there are some cases. I know there are some, I think in sports women, there are some cases of lesbians who have used surrogacy. So what I think is that it's quite the fact of being gay or lesbian is quite irrelevant. I mean, it doesn't say much. The thing is, if you are a person who is going to use this, who's going to abuse women, and who is going to take advantage of this exploitation or not. Of course, I don't know exactly what the question is. Of course, if you're talking about the reproductive rights, I think this is complete, this is complete, manipulation, no? It's like a crazy thing. But yeah.
Okay, Patricia, I think we have to stop right now. Thank you again to have been there. This webinar will be edited and uploaded to YouTube, and everybody will be able to listen to it again. You said, Patricia, that you are going to send us your translation, the version, the Spanish version. So we might subtitle it in Spanish, maybe. Thank you, everybody, to have been there. And we're going to organize more webinars. We're not able to do it each month, but we will do our best, because there are so many more subjects and topics and different angles of view to tackle surrogacy. So we will let you know, we will know to everybody the next webinars as soon as it's ready. So bye-bye, everybody, and thank you again. Thank you again, Patricia.
Bye.
This is
Thank you.
very important.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.